This USAID thing that's going on, Mike Benz has been on that like a pit bull, and I've been following him on X, and he's going to come back on here and kind of explain everything. But he explained it the last time he was here, and I don't think I really grasped it until Elon's 6 wizards. He brought in some young wizards to go in there and go over the books, and they're just finding crazy shit. It's great, and it's so interesting. I was listening to a left-wing podcast today. I like to mix it up. I listen to all kinds of different stuff, and it was like I was listening to a different world. Like, they weren't even talking about all of this corruption and all this obvious buying of influence. Instead, they were talking about aid overseas and how people are going to starve. And I'm like,
it's mind-boggling, and there's also, I have to say, I'm upset at the general pattern of a failure to recognize how right those of us who hypothesized that there was a racket that had overtaken our entire governance structure. We turn out to be absolutely right about this, and no one's going to mention it. That's mind-blowing.
It's very strange that the media is ignoring it, especially the left-wing media. It's just too big of a win for the right, and so they're just ignoring it. And then they're just highlighting the good things that USA did, which I'm sure it probably did. Probably had to do some good things to at least justify its existence.
As a cover story, I'm not even sure. Maybe it doesn't change anything. Obviously, this was a mechanism used to funnel money to all sorts of things that we didn't vote on, that don't make sense in light of our constitutional structure. And I obviously have concerns like everybody else about where this train takes us, but seeing that structure broken up it's a huge relief.
They gave $27 million to the George Soros Prosecutor Fund. So our own government is funding this left-wing lunatic who is hiring the most insane prosecutors who are letting people out of jail who commit violent crimes.
And that's exactly how this racket worked, that the ability to tax the American public and then effectively get us to pay for being propagandized, for being surveilled, that's the game. And I don't know what era we currently live in. Obviously, there's a lot that's confusing about what the Trump administration is up to, but I don't think any reasonable person could be unhappy that we are exiting that era.
I'm going to read off some of the things that this guy, Kanakota the Great, on Twitter listed. And this is off the Jesse Waters show. USAID, $20 million for Iraqi Sesame Street, $2 million for Moroccan pottery classes, $11 million to tell Vietnam to stop burning trash, $27 million to give gift bags to illegals. $27 million. $330 million to help Afghanis grow crops. Crops. I wonder what those crops are. What's their biggest crop, Brett?
It's going to be the poppy seeds for bagels, I'm thinking.
$200 million on an unused Afghani dam. $250 million on an unused Afghani road. This is wild. I mean, some of this stuff is really, really crazy.
Well, yes, and, USAID is, of course, riddled through whatever international madness it is that caused us to open our southern border and facilitate an invasion through the Darien Gap. So, seeing that structure laid bare is... It almost feels like it can't be real. Like it can't have been this close to the surface, and yet here we are.
They were spending, is this number correct? I think the number that I read was $600 million every 2 months to ship in illegals.
Sounds right. I don't know the number offhand, but
what the fuck?
Well, you have to realize that basically we had a shadow apparatus functioning. And it involves all kinds of things. It involves payoffs to people who didn't deserve them. It involves contracting to entities that were necessary to get the work done. So I don't think we can properly understand what these numbers mean and what they're actually being used for. But it was a racket.
Well, we were always wondering, like, why is our debt so high? Why is the national debt so high? Like, why is our deficit so insane? Well, this is it. I mean, how about the one where they paid $236 billion, like, for chargers? Do you know that they were trying to set up chargers?
You mean car chargers? And they only built a couple of them?
Excuse me. $40 billion for electric car ports. 8 ports have been built. You know how crazy that is? $40 billion for carports.
But I have to say, as much as this is shocking, I wasn't surprised. I thought that effectively our entire system had been turned into a racket and that we were basically being fed a cover story from it. And it's weird to now have the evidence of this, but I think it was apparent that whatever had taken over our system wasn't interested in the well-being of average people, that it was interested in the power of the state to take people's resources and redistribute them, and that really is what's been going on for most of our adult lives.
And it's also important to note that this progressive, left-leaning, like radical left arm of the government, of the country, was manufactured.
Yes.
It's all manufactured. It's all manufactured and supported. It's not organic, which is really fascinating about the other side, because the other side, the reaction to it is organic. Like, say what you want about the Trump administration and what you think about him. That was an organic shift where people were like, fucking enough.
Yes, it was an overdue reaction.
Yeah.
The cover story that what we were up to was righting past wrongs was so pernicious and pervasive that it was hard to get our footing to challenge it.
Right.
But it shouldn't really be surprising that movement wasn't organic. Of course it was induced. It was a cover story for theft. And we're going to be waking up to the magnitude of that theft for quite some time.
I think this is going to take years. Chamath said that it's going to be like Iran-Contra on steroids. That's what he said. He said when you get to the bottom of all this, it's going to be insane. Because they haven't even got to the Medicaid yet. They haven't even got to the medical stuff. There's so much they haven't even tapped into where they think the real motherload of fraud is.
Yes, and I must say that there is also another aspect to this which we have to be careful about, which is that the justifiable anger at discovering what it is that we've been dragged into as a nation is going to make it hard to see where the limits ought to be in terms of upending this stuff. In other words, at the moment, I'm cheering for the wrecking ball.
Right.
Break this stuff up.
Yeah.
Never again. But there are...
What's that, Jamie?
Read an article about the spending on the chargers. They said that they haven't actually, according to this, they haven't actually spent all that money yet.
Well, what do they do with it?
They've spent some of it to make some of those things, but it hasn't been allocated yet. It's a long article going through all the spending that's been done. It's on factcheck.org.
Factcheck.org. Who runs that?
I don't know. Some of the chargers have been made. Some of them are on the way to be made, and they've built 61 at 15 stations since mid-August or through mid-August. 14,900 more are currently in some stage of development. But that's where it goes into like where they are, what they have to be done, and who's getting the money from them. It has to be done through a long process from each state.
Yeah, the question is, how can we get a proper accounting? As you point out, who the hell is factcheck.org?
Well, that's the problem with fact-checking organizations. That should really be illegal. Like, I think if you're a fact-checking organization, we should have stringent rules on what influence is being peddled. Like, who's paying for these fact-checkers? Who's behind the scenes? What is the it should be very transparent. How did you determine whether or not this was true or false? Because there are a lot of things that get said. Like, I don't know if you saw this, but Elizabeth Warren got confronted, and it's on Twitter this morning. She got confronted about the amount of money that she's received from pharmaceutical drug companies. She said she's never received any money from pharmaceutical drug companies and never received any monies from any PACs. And then, of course, underneath it, Community Notes strikes again. And, of course, she received millions.
Yeah.
She's a fucking liar.
Well, and it's an arms race.
Yeah.
How can pharma cloak the money that it's giving so that there's plausible deniability at the point that Elizabeth Warren is confronted, or Bernie Sanders?
Bernie Sanders was hilarious. Only 1.5 billion. Only 1.5 million out of 200 million. Only 1.5.
Yep, that's what I saw as
He
well.
tried to say nothing. Only the hardworking people of this country gave me money.
Well, I don't think the Democrats understand that it's over, and that there was a vast infrastructure that made their feeble arguments viable, and that infrastructure is now collapsing. People are far more aware, and their lives aren't going to function anymore.
Well, it makes sense now that we're seeing these numbers because, okay, this was what was funding the infrastructure. Now we get it. Because it wasn't, otherwise, it's organic. This is the will of the people. This is how people are moving. It's not. It wasn't that at all. This was all organic, and it was really about control and money. It had nothing to do with helping people, making people better, giving aid to foreign countries. That's all a cloak and dagger bullshit show. The reality was it's about money.
Yeah, it's
money and
always
influence.
It's always about power and limited resources.
Yeah.
And this was a new game taking place at a level that was hard to believe, and therefore many of us couldn't see it.
Did you see how they used software to map out 55,000 different NGOs that were used as a branch of the democratic system?
No, I didn't catch that.
I could send it to you. I think I sent it to you, Jamie, right? We went over it on the podcast before. It's so nutty that this was all kind of like hidden until they started using software to try to like figure out like, well, and map out where all the influence goes. And the crazy thing about the NGOs, and this is one of the things that Mike Benz has gone like so deep into, it's essentially like they contribute to the Democratic Party, the government pays them. It's like it's all this like weird sort of like circular money transfer thing that's out in the open.
No, it's a positive feedback. The whole idea is power is utilized to free resources that garner more power, and it is the exact inverse of the system that we are supposed to have.
Yeah. It's very interesting.
Where we're headed, that's a harder question.
Where we're headed is we're going to own Gaza.
Somehow.
This is it. So Fractal Technology maps previously hidden connections between 55,000 liberal NGOs, revealing how tax dollars allegedly flowed through major institutions like Vanguard and Morgan Stanley to groups like the Chinese Progressive Association. This breakthrough tracking system can now monitor every dollar going to every NGO, exposing intricate funding webs that traditional tech couldn't detect. So, example, Black Voters Matter Fund's $4 million distribution network was invisible until quantum mapping revealed dozens of subsidiary organizations. The unprecedented mapping reveals a previously hidden web of financial relationships. And that's what it's really all about. And
yes. The problem is, sometimes when I see like a list of preposterous scientific projects that have gotten big grants, I read it and I think, they all sound preposterous, but I don't know. Some of these things are likely to have had a good explanation, and it just is not apparent in the soundbite. And some of them are every bit as preposterous as they seem. And so I can't look at a map like that and say what I would expect if the system was healthy. So I'm cautious about it. I don't think the system was healthy. I think the system was a racket from one end to the other, and I've been saying that we've been living in the era of malignant governance where there's basically no element of this you couldn't turn off and make us better. But we have to be suspicious also of our understanding of how a properly functioning system would graph in something like that, so that we don't overrun the train station when we get there.